Greetings to all CRF members and friends across Canada and indeed around the world, and a special welcome to the folks at Veterans for Freedom on their dedicated streaming channels as they view this video summary of the CRF update for 23 August 2024. The title of this update is Useful Idiots and Psychopaths, and begins by noting the plethora of bad decisions that have been foisted upon the good folk of Canada over the past decade or so. From policies that have adversely impacted their pocketbooks to those that have threatened the health and well-being of themselves and their children, the onslaught of ideas responsible for unnecessary hardship and worry has been incessant. The resultant worry can be expressed in numbers through happiness indices, this covering the time period from 2013 to the present day. In what may charitably be termed a coincidence, it is apparent that the precipitous drop in Canadian happiness began with the advent of the Trudeau government and continues unabated to the present day. On closer inspection, and of particular interest, is the fact that younger Canadians are experiencing the greatest malaise as they have gone from the happiest age group in pre-Trudeau Canada to become the least joyful nationally. As if this wasn't bad enough, they are now 58th internationally and among the least happiest in the G7. The plight of Canada's young is easy to explain when one considers what they have to look forward to down the road. It's looking to be a world where home ownership is an impossibility and job prospects are likewise diminished. How could it be otherwise given the government's decision to float a $360 billion deficit in response to shutting down the economy in the name of flattening the curve? Not to mention its embrace of unconstrained immigration policies thereafter. The combination would prove a disastrous entity on several fronts as a result of inflation foreseeable by any 4-year-old, would stoke inflation rates that have not been seen in decades. The knock-on effect was the equally obvious need to increase interest rates to wrestle inflation back down to the ground, which of course sent mortgage costs through the roof. The reckless immigration policies would provide the inflationary coup de grace as they drastically expanded the demand side of the housing equation. Who could blame the young for leaving the country? It is interesting to note that the bevy of bad ideas implemented in the run-up to the Wuhan virus pandemic and thereafter can all be traced back to offshore influences. The decision, for example, to scrap tried and tested public health measures to deal with such pandemics came to us from a World Health Organization enthralled with Chinese-style lockdowns in lieu of early outpatient treatments. The lockdowns, of course, would not only lead to profligate public spending, but the need for surveillance systems capable of reporting on the movement and vaccination status of individuals. These may have not been bad ideas in a communist people's republic, but they certainly railed against the notion of a strong and free democratic state like Canada used to be. The bad idea that lockdowns would not only lead to inflation, high interest rates, and unaffordable housing, they would also kick off Freedom Convoy 2022 protests that millions of Canadians would support and which would spread around the world. It would appear that some bad ideas have the power to unite. The bad ideas that have infected Canada increasingly over the past decade all seem to rail against a natural order that was seen as common sense by rank-and-file Canadians. Overriding such objective realities has required more than just a little magical thinking to make them recede into obscurity. Still, such thinking would be thrown into overdrive in an effort to deep-six any rational belief in cause and effect. New realities would be willed into existence, and they would be enthusiastically promoted by true believers, longing to join new collective compacts that lionize the ideology of woke. A woke ideology characterized by a frenzied need to negate and deconstruct traditional truths and more than willing to take no prisoners when it came to dealing with those who would beg to differ. And so we see those who would be considered accomplished Canadian patriots in any other age being pilloried as malcontents in need of re-education. When considering bad ideas that have arrived on Canadian shores from abroad, one cannot help but note the magical thinking required to make sense of the initiatives embedded with the 17 Sustainability Development Goals of the UN's Agenda 2030. These goals, signed on to on our behalf by the Conservative government of September 2015, include the need to absolutely demolish the economies and social cohesion of Western societies to accommodate climate change and worldwide migration, respectively. In a previous age, characterized by the need to justify such consequential enterprises through the lens of objective reality, these SDGs would have come under robust analysis and debate. In today's world of magical thinking, however, they are simply afforded unqualified support as they are willed into existence. It would seem that the domain of climate change, it matters not that a growing number of credible, world-renowned authorities are coming out with solid refutations of Agenda 2030's climate narrative. Magical thinking persists even as global warming models fail abysmally and folks still flock to Florida to purchase waterfront property. Similarly, on the immigration file, recent demonstrations in nearly all Western cities post-October 7 leave little doubt that the unconstrained influx of migrants from diverse cultures can be a reckless and dangerous project. Still, the magical thinking continues and conversation surrounding such realities is either stymied or banned altogether. It's as though magical thinking is irresistible and has the power to create unchallengeable pseudo-realities. Author and mathematician James Lindsay has written extensively on the advent of pseudo-realities that operate outside the laws of cause and effect and exist only in the presence of, quote, a sufficient quantity of people in the society who believe them or refuse to challenge them, unquote. Eric Hoffer, the longshoreman philosopher of the 20th century, studied these true believers and found them to be motivated by a frustration and boredom that made them more than prepared to walk away from unfulfilled lives to become part of the comforting oneness of a collective compact. The problem is, as Lindsay notes, that pseudo-realities embraced by these cowards and rationalizers, his quotes, create a playground for psychopaths who seek to consolidate the power created by the confusion and division that they inevitably kick up. Canadians saw the cowards and rationalizers reveal themselves shamelessly throughout the Wuhan virus pandemic. The judiciary proved itself to be chock full of such pseudo-realists as it sloughed off any obligation to make judgments on the basis of evidence. Indeed, the propensity of judges to bend the knee to unconstitutional government mandates and edicts has created an apprehension of bias that now motivates harmed litigants to withdraw their cases from the court system. Such notices of discontinuance are sure signs of the Canadian judicial system abdicating its role as a check and balance on runaway executive power. But this cowardice and rationalization are not limited to our legal systems. Unfortunately, the tendency is alive and well, as chronicled in the In Hot interview with Maggie Hope Braun, and have spread from the federal and provincial levels to infect our own municipalities. This has become more than obvious as UN-based climate change initiatives made attractive by money and promises of saving the planet come to your town. James Lindsay notes that pseudo-realities are made more palatable to cowards and rationalizers, otherwise known as useful idiots, through the use of pseudo-logic and pseudo-morality. In the case of municipalities assailed by UN organizations like the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, otherwise known as ICLEI, the faux logic entails linking CO2 with global warming even as a moral net zero utopia justifies any hardship that climate action might generate. This end justifies the means trope is the stuff of psychopaths, attracted by the dollars and power spun off by the resulting economic and social dislocation that is created. Unlike the useful idiots, you will not see them in public spaces, but will have to follow the money trail to see where they live. Again, and as noted in the In Hot interview with Ms. Braun, in discussing the assault on Canadian municipalities by the ILCEI, this particular trail leads to Agenda 2030 and a China-controlled United Nations when it comes to bad ideas, magical thinking, useful idiots, and psychopaths. Is it time to recognize and ignore them all? In closing, a reminder to join us at CanadianCitizens.org, where you can see this update in its full glory, including all the links to the documents cited. Simply go to the News tab at the top of the page and select C3RF Member Updates from its drop-down menu. Until next time, this is Russ Cooper signing off, wishing you and yours much happiness and freedom from C3RF.